Greetings, I'm Pearl John from Logos Management, and let me extend a warm welcome to the other 167. I'm thrilled that you could join me today as we continue the series Praying as He Taught to Pray, Part 4. Last week we spoke of three phrases of the model prayer: Hallowed be your name, your kingdom come, and your will be done on earth. This week we move on to the next three phrases. Come along with me as we deep dive on these. Give us this day our daily bread. Give us this day our daily bread. It is remarkable that Jesus, the bread of life, asked us to pray unto God for the bread in this world. This points to praying for our essentials. Praying for our essential needs is no sin, but praying for luxuries and hoarding bread for a lifetime is a clear contradiction. I am not against saving for the rainy day or being cognizant of the future needs. In fact, Luke chapter 14 and verse 28 says, "For which of you desiring to build a tower does not first sit down and count the cost, whether he has enough to complete it?" And further, Proverbs chapter 21 and 20, "The wise store up choice food and olive oil, but fools gulp theirs down." Remember how the phrasing goes. It does not say, "Give me my daily bread." The phrasing is, "Give us our daily bread." Praying for our daily bread, but not being mindful of the millions who lack nourishment is a clear contradiction. What am I saying? Our focus should not be on the bread merely for us, but for others as well. Jesus said in John chapter 4 and verse 34, "My bread is to do the will of the Father who sent me." God's will is to reconcile man who is lost in sin unto himself, which is why Jesus came into the world seeking after the lost. Are we partnering with the Lord in bringing about this reconciliation? And that's a question for all of us to examine this morning. Are you making efforts to partner with God to bring about the reconciliation of man to God? We move on to the next golden phrase in this prayer. And forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. Forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. I'd like you to pay attention to the phrasing of this prayer. This is a conditional prayer, and Jesus, who is the reservoir of unconditional love, is introducing a conditional prayer here. What does that mean? Seeking God's forgiveness when we harbor an unforgiving heart is a contradiction. Forgiving our debtors is a prerequisite to being forgiven. For a long time, I was holding a grudge against an extended family, and it was eating into me and it was burning me down until I allowed the forgiveness to just flow forth and left that grudge out. Do you hold grudge against anyone in your neighborhood? And are you still praying the Lord's Prayer? Forgiveness is the essence of reconciliation. Where there is no forgiveness, there can be no reconciliation. And where there is no reconciliation, there can be no peace. So you and I are called to be the channels of reconciliation and peace. We move on to the next golden phrase in the prayer. And do not lead us into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. Do not lead us into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. When we pray, "Do not lead us into temptation," we may sound very pious. But in reality, are we rushing into temptation? If we are rushing into temptation and praying that "Do not lead me into temptation," that is a contradiction. You have a problem at hand. As a young college student, I served as the Nagpur Intercollegiate Evangelical Union's president, and we had students from multiple colleges who were part of the NICEU. And the medical girls were an integral part of this group, and they invited me to their hostel for an evening get together. I pondered on it for a moment and I said, a man in a girls' hostel after dark is not a good testimony, and I declined their offer graciously. The next part of the verse, deliver us from the evil one, is sensible only when you have determined in your heart to resist the temptation. Remember the verse, James 4:7, resist the devil and he will flee from you. Using the reconciliation lens, there is a high possibility that we may have a strong temptation to ignore the need around, but we are called to steer away from that temptation and pray that we will not be led into that temptation. We will move on to the next golden phrase in prayer next week. This is Pearl John signing off the Other 167. We deeply appreciate you watching the Other 167 day after day. We'll continue our series on praying as he taught to pray, part 5 next Friday. Have a great weekend and a blessed week ahead. God bless you.